Alrighty, so for the record, you want to state your name and what you're interested in the matter, and then if you want, your political affiliation, things like that.
Sure. So, Mike Rose. I'm politically, I've been a registered Republican probably all my voting life. And the Monica Lewinsky scandal, I do remember. I was around when that happened, and I do remember being televised and those kind of things. So yeah, I remember it pretty well.
So for the viewers who may not know, can you please explain what the Monica Lewinsky scandal is?
Sure. So, in my simple terms, it's about our president committing adultery and lying.
Mm-hmm.
As part of being in that position and being in the Oval Office. So yeah, to me, it's kind of a big deal. Maybe not as big a deal to others, but to me, that's a pretty big deal.
All right. How did the scandal impact your support of Clinton, whether it was positive or negative?
Well, I didn't start as a Clinton supporter necessarily. In fact, when his second term was coming up, we actually had a election party for the opposing candidate, Bob Dole, but that didn't work out. So I wouldn't say it hurt my opinion of him any, other than I think it hurt the office. I think it really hurt the opinion of the office, because until this was made public, most people at least felt that there was a certain amount of respect for the position of the president, and that leaders in those positions, especially the president of the free world, basically should be held to a higher standard. And so once this came out, I think it definitely hurt the overall view of the presidential position. But as far as my personal view, I didn't have a high view of the president necessarily to start with, so this definitely didn't help.
Yeah, and you being a registered Republican probably started out that way.
I mean, you do, you obviously respect the office, right? And you pray for your president no matter who it is. But yeah, this didn't help.
Yeah. So how do you think this scandal impact his national popularity and perception amongst independents, Republicans, and Democrats, and just Americans in general?
Yeah, again, I think a lot of us kind of viewed it as, we obviously, from a popularity perspective, it was all over the news. That's one thing, right? So, not that it's a good kind of popularity, but
he is the president, or was the president, so
right.
Yeah.
But from a perception standpoint, basically he lied to the American people, and then he cheated on his wife, in the Oval Office. So, to me, it couldn't have helped. I'm not sure how the general public viewed it, but I know me personally, I didn't appreciate it, right? That would happen. Let alone with the aftermath. I really think it should have been handled differently. But yeah, I definitely don't think it. It was popular, as in it was on television and sensationalized, I guess, right, on TV. But as far as his perception, I'm sure it didn't help even above it, even with independents. I'm sure it didn't help knowing. Again, some people like to separate it. I don't. I think you are who you are in private is who you are in public. You really can't be two people. So what you do in private matters to me. What happens, especially when you're in a public service office.
Yeah, a lot of Americans feel that way. How do you think this incident changed the youth's perception of President Clinton and, in a sense, just the office of the President of the United States?
Yeah, that's a good question. So something that was repeated over and over, was President Clinton on video saying, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. And even though everyone knew maybe he didn't have sexual intercourse with the woman, he had sexual activity, whatever you want to call it. But I do remember, and you can see this over time, that it did change youth's perception of what constituted, sexual activity and what you could get away with, right, versus what you couldn't. And when the president was getting away with it, and his wife was even lying for him, well then, then if you weren't, quote, having sexual intercourse, well then you weren't having sexual relations. It's kind of what it seemed like the popular consensus was, especially among youth, and I think that's been a terrible thing.
Yeah, I agree. So from your perspective, how did your view of the Democratic Party change out of the scandal as an organization, really, with their involvement in attempting to cover up the scandal and things like that?
The big thing I took away from it that maybe I should have already known this at the time, but in general, not obviously not always a standard. Every individual is different, but in general, so for instance, when the Watergate scandal happened, Nixon resigned from office, right, or stepped down. However, he actually did that. But I noticed. So I was, of course, once Clinton was impeached, or at least partially impeached, I thought, any respectful adult should step down from that position. But that's when I learned that, or came to understand that a lot of times Democrats don't seem to do that. And you've seen it in other popular news of other Democrats. I mean, all of us are going to fail, right? None of us are perfect. But if we're in a public position where we're a public servant and we do fail, I think the right thing to do is to step down, no matter what the role is, especially if you're the president. And so, to me, that definitely changed my view of the Democratic Party, and I've seen it since then, in the however many years it's been since then. I've seen that repeated over and over, where they fail, they get caught, they get whatever, and they just continue on like nothing happened. And I think that's wrong.
Yeah, we've seen that trend continue throughout the party. So did the national view of the office of the president change? So not really the man, the office he held. Did it get less respected because of this incident?
Yeah, I think so. Great question. People, the arguments I heard, which I don't agree with, again, people were trying to separate the position from, quote, what he does in private, as in, well, he's a good president because the economy's good, gas is cheap, whatever, however people relate to, the president's doing a good job, and what he does in private is on his own, right? And I get and can respect some of that, but at the same time,
he is the president. There's a certain amount of accountability that comes with that role. Any
leader, anybody in a leadership position, no matter how small, is held to a higher standard than those that aren't in those leadership positions. And it's also biblical. And so, to me, I noticed, though, the national view changed a bit, right? People are like, oh, well, he did that, whatever, it's private. I mean, and you've seen it with even with Republican leaders since then. Some people, although I think they're held to a higher standard than maybe the Democrats, but some people have kind of let go certain things. And again, to me, you can't separate who you are in private versus who you are in public. And so, unfortunately, people from that incident, definitely Democrats, I heard say, oh, well, that's what he did in private, who cares? Just get on with it. I think it's bad.
I agree. How did the media at the time represent the scandal? Did they report it honestly?
I don't remember so much about how the media reported it. I didn't watch a whole lot of TV then. I still don't. But in general, I feel like they did report it a bit more honestly than they probably would today, just because the news then didn't seem to be quite as biased and opinionated. It wasn't perfect. No one's perfect, but it seemed to be a bit more honest. So, again, I don't remember all the specifics, but I feel like today this would have probably even been covered up, or probably wouldn't even made the news. Where then at least it made the news, and it did lead to, again, a partial impeachment, I guess.
And with new forms of social media and things like that, we have definitely seen a shift of reporting and with the fact checking and things like that. It's kind of, there's a lot more of a thing called shadow banning going on, where they let you post things, but they won't let you circulate it or little people see it. So it's kind of...
Right. It's controlled.
It's controlled. It's kind of straight out of the novel 1984.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. So, the Ministry of Truth.
Exactly. So the next question is the Clintons' attempt to cover up, meaning Hillary and the organization, and Bill for that matter, cover up the scandal as far as, Hillary went on a CBS interview and stated that, she stood behind her husband and the allegations were false. He had done nothing wrong. And then the president ended up facing impeachment charges and was, in fact, impeached in the House, granted acquitted in the Senate, but still, that means there's merit to what he did. So, how these actions impacted the perception of honesty and trust that the Clintons and the organizations they represent project? How has your opinion changed?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, to me, what's amazing, I mean, obviously, for most people, there should be a loss of confidence there, right? They lied, they tried to cover it up, right? Let alone his wife, granted, I think it's great she stood by her husband on one hand, but at the same time, if she knows the truth, that she needs to be truthful.
She's a first lady, so there's again accountability that comes.
And the fact that she's been able to hold offices since then just blows me away. To me, this should have been, if it had been, I feel like if it had been on the Republican Party, they would have never held office again, right? If something like this had happened.
Yeah, she went on to be Secretary of State under President Obama, and then ended up running against Donald Trump in 2016. So yeah, you're right.
You shouldn't even. I mean, to me, again, knowing you've lied in front of the American people, that alone should have just. I don't know. But the Clintons amazingly are able to recover somehow. I don't know.
Who knows? And the final question is, how has impeachment as a political tool kind of turned into almost a weapon in the modern age? With we saw the Trump administration, the Democrats were just because they didn't like him, they were using it basically. What's your opinion with that? How do you view that?
Yeah, I feel like it's not what the founding fathers meant for it to be, right? Our articles of impeachment were meant to, or at least my understanding was a vote of no confidence, lack of confidence, right? But because of crimes against.
Yes, the Constitution outlines it as a high crimes against the United States.
High crimes against state.
Right, it's vague, but
right.
High crimes meaning treason, those kind of things, and lying to Congress, which is what Bill Clinton did.
It should be. You're out, right? I mean, that's what it should be. But to me, that's what I feel like that's what it was meant for. Now it's not. When in fact, even when Clinton was impeached in the House, not in the Senate, I mean, I felt like again any respectful person would have stepped down and resigned because even if they weren't quote fully impeached, he was partially impeached. So I feel like it's almost just a political thing now. It's not a really what it was meant to be, right?
I mean, the first time a president was impeached was Andrew Johnson right after the Civil War happened, and those charges were real. And then people would argue that Nixon would have been impeached, but he resigned beforehand, before it even went to that.
Respectful.
And then President Clinton was the next one, and of course he was impeached in the House and then acquitted in the Senate. And how the impeachment process works is the House just votes in a committee, and then they send it to the House floor, and then they vote, and then the president actually has a defense trial in the Senate. That's when the real evidence gets presented, things like that. And then, people would argue the same thing for or against President Trump. He was technically impeached at the same level that Bill Clinton was, and people would argue that he should have stepped down. But recent things that come to light that prove that some of those charges were falsely against him, falsely accused.
Well, and at this point, it's how do you continue to take the high ground, right? But you keep losing ground. So at some point, I don't necessarily blame him for not resigning because he knew the truth,
exactly.
At least of those matters. So I know it's a shame, right? I do think.
Well, that just proves that it's been used more and more as a political weapon instead of
what it was meant for.
Exactly. So
exactly.
Yeah, it's sad to see the Constitution abused in ways that our founding fathers did not intend for.
Absolutely. If we don't know our history, we're
it's George Washington.
Trouble.
Don't know your history, you'll repeat it.
That's right. All right, was that it?
Yeah, that's it.